Hello and welcome back to Cogito Ergo Pod, the podcast that looks at the theological, mythological, philosophical and esoteric, but in a way that hopefully makes it accessible and fun. There's some more wishful thinking for you. My name is Daniel, and in this episode we are jumping into our caravans and travelling to the Hebridean Islands to upset the locals and explore the rich world of mythology and legend which exists there. Before I go any further, I would like to thank Otta Flora MacDonald Louise Swire, born 1898 and died 1972. Her book, Sky, The Island and Its Legends, published 1952, helped to write the script for this episode. I received the book as a Christmas present this year, and I have to say it's a fantastic read and I highly recommend it. I could not in fact recommend it enough. So with that, let's get going as we explore the world of the Hebridean myths and legends. Before we can get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I think it's important I give a bit of context. A little bit of background to what and where the Hebrides are. For me, as someone raised on the Isle of Skye, it is Chian Mochria, land of my heart. And yes, I can speak Gaelic fluently, which may come in handy here. It's also a place, as I said, where I grew up, went to school, made friends, found love, all those wonderful things you do when you're young. So for me, this is quite a personal episode today, something I feel quite passionately about since it's an area of the world I'm quite passionate about as well. So the Hebrides, or as they're known in Inish Gael, are an archipelago off the west coast of the Scottish mainland. The islands fall into two main groups, based on their proximity to the mainland, the Inner and Outer Hebrides. These islands have a long history of occupation, dating back to the Mesolithic period, and the culture of the inhabitants has been successfully influenced by the cultures of Celtic speakers, Norse speakers, and English speakers alike. The Hebrides are where much of Scottish Gaelic literature and Gaelic music has its historical origins. The islands have a combined area of 7,285 square kilometres, or 2,813 square miles, and as of 2011, a combined population of around 45,000 people. The Hebrides can be divided, as I said, into two main groups, separated from one another by the Minch to the north and the Sea of the Hebrides to the south. The Inner Hebrides lie closer to the Scottish mainland and include the likes of Jura, Islay, Skye, Mull, Rasay, Staffa, and the Small Isles. There are 36 inhabited islands in this group. Meanwhile, the Outer Hebrides form a chain of more than 100 islands and small skerries located about 70 kilometres, 45 miles, west of mainland Scotland. Among them, 15 are inhabited. The main inhabited Outer Hebrides islands include Lewis and Harris, North Uist, Benbecula, South Uist, and Barra. Now that is done, it is time to get on with the good stuff. I've split this episode into Hebridean mythological creatures and Hebridean legends, with many areas to cover. Some profiles and stories are much longer than others, but no less interesting. Some of these sections have a lot of information in them, which obviously means there must be a lot of stories to go with them, and some sections are much smaller. I've listed each subsection within the mythological creatures and the legends with their own little titles. So I'll say what I'm going to speak about, and then I'll give you a description of what they are. So to begin with, we'll start with the Hebridean mythological creatures, and possibly one of the most well-known of these is the Kelpie. Now, Kelpies can take the shape of beautiful horses that appear near rivers and lakes. They are said to be identifiable by their wet manes and are usually grey or white. It is said they are so beautiful that people cannot help but touch them and even climb on their backs, at which point the Kelpies will go to the water and take their riders down to a watery grave. One specific story talks of a Kelpie captured by the Laird of Morphy. The Laird harnessed the strength of the water foam Kelpie by using a halter stamped with the sign of the cross. The captor forced the Kelpie to carry heavy stones to build his castle, and when the work was complete, the Laird released the Kelpie, who was understandably unhappy at its treatment. The Kelpie is said to have cursed the Laird, a reason popularly believed to explain the extinction of the Laird family. Now, kelpies are also associated with other famous legends, such as the Loch Ness Monster, and a great number of other monsters which supposedly live in the lochs all around Scotland. Now, the Selkies were legendary creatures that could transform themselves from seal to human form and back again. The legend of the Selkie apparently originated on the Orkney and Shetland Islands, where selch or selkie is the Scots word for seal. There are many Scottish stories about Selkies, but the most common is the tragic story of theft, love, and loss. Now, seals live close to people in most coastal and island communities in Scotland. They hunt the same fish. Those big eyes and round heads look almost human in the water. And when they sing, you're sure you could understand the words if only you listened hard enough. There is a widespread belief that seals can become humans, perhaps only at certain times of the year, the spring tide, midsummer, full moon, and that on those magical nights they shed their sealskins to sing and dance on the shore. Once a young man of the village crept up to watch them. They danced naked on the beach, pale skin visible in moments of moonlight, and they played music like he had never heard. And one of the young seal women, one of the young Selkies, was so beautiful that his heart was lost. So he crawled slowly. He crawled slower than the tide over the pile of sealskins at the edge of their party, and he hunted for the softest, smallest, most perfect skin. This must be hers. He rolled it up, shoved it under his jacket, and crawled away to his house overlooking the shore. When the party was finished, and all the songs sung, all the dances danced, and the morning light threatened in the east, the Selkies rushed over to the pile of skins. The Selkies found their own skins and pulled them on like capes, swirling around and engulfing their human bodies. They all became seals again and slipped into the sea, all but the young Selkie girl, naked and shivering with no sealskin to put on. So she was grateful when the young fisherman appeared in the dawn light with a blanket and took her home for a hot drink and to warm by the fire. And she was impressed at his commitment to search for her sealskin all along the beach, under every rock. But he never found it, and she had to be content to live in his house by the sea, to hear and smell and watch the waves, but never swim there again. For a Selkie can't become a seal again without her sealskin. So she thought she would never be with her family, her brothers and sisters and children again. When he asked her to live with him forever and to be his wife, his love for her was so apparent, and her home and children in the sea so impossible to reach, that she said yes. She was as happy as she could be, close to the sea, loved by her man, bringing up her family, listening with tears in her big brown eyes every full moon as the seal family sang on the beach. But one Sunday, while her husband and children were at church, a place where she had never felt entirely comfortable, she was spring cleaning. Every shelf dusted, every flagstone gleamed. She clambered up a ladder to deal with the cobwebs among the roof beams. As she poked and prodded the duster into a dark corner, a dry old bundle fell down on her head. A sealskin, bound up with string, hidden, binding her here forever. She cut the knots and let the skin unroll. It still smelt salty. She thought of her children at church. She thought of the sea and the fish and the currents and the songs. She thought of her children under the waves. And she thought of her husband, pretending to search for a sealskin that he had hidden himself above her head. When her family came home from church, she was gone. The fisherman saw the old string cut into bits on the floor, and he knew where she had gone. Now the fisherman's children go down to the shore every evening and hear a sad song of the seal floating in the bay, crying because she left her children on the shore to be with her children in the sea. So a selkie is very similar to a kelpie in a way, where it is a creature which has a particular form. The form can change, but a selkie is a bit more of a tragic story because they can become human, and that they can, as told in the story, develop connections between the land and the sea, and a conflict exists between them when it comes to the land and the sea. Now, also in the oceans, you can find the blue men of the Mensch. These blue-skinned creatures, also known as storm kelpies, are said to swim right up below the surface of the water between Lewis and the Scottish mainland, looking for boats to sink and sailors to drown. So, similar to Kelpies, in that they're looking to kill people. However, it seems that the Blue Men of the Minch have larger targets to contend with. They look human, but they are blue in colour. They create storms and seek out ships to sink. Some say the Blue Men live underwater in a clan system. The origin of the Blue Men legend is unclear, but it's possible to have roots in Moorish slaves marooned in Ireland in the 9th century by Viking pirates and slave traders. Sticking with the ocean again, we have the merfolk. Merfolk are usually an unlucky omen, foretelling disaster and often provoking it, often with murderous intent. It's claimed that there is a mermaid's grave in Benbecula, though the exact location of the purported grave is unknown. According to legend, the mermaid was killed in the early 19th century after having been sighted for a number of days, after which a teenage boy threw a rock at it and thus killing it. So they're not too tough. Counts stated that the upper part of the creature was the size of an infant, while the lower half resembled a salmon. Mermen are wilder than mermaids, much uglier, and have no interest in humans. So the mermaids are out to cause mischief. Mermen have no interest in us. Now there are accounts of creatures that live on the land. And one such creature, whose name may be quite well known, is the werewolf. The Hebridean has his own tales of the werewolf, and supposedly a family of werewolves were said to occupy the island on Loch Langevig. Though reportedly long dead, legend tells that disturbing their graves would release their spirits and presumably bring the werewolves back. There's also a shape-shifting demon known as Bash Vielach, who haunts the Oddle Pass on the Isle of Skye. Its howls could be heard in the night. And now there's also figures who appear more human, however, they are folk with powers beyond our understanding. And possibly one of the most famous of these otherworldly creatures would be the devil. And in Scottish folklore, a character by the name of Black Donald is such a devil. It is said that the devil is good at all jobs except for one, tailoring, because when the devil is among the tailors, they close up shop so that he has never learnt to baste. He can take many disguises, including an old man in a black suit, but whatever disguise he takes, he's always given himself away because of his cloven feet, which cannot be shod. So Black Donald is just another name for the devil, which exists in Scottish folklore. And there is another figure in folklore known as the Ben Year. So if you could imagine, it is a dark evening and you find yourself wandering in the gathering gloom along the side of a small highland stream. You are alarmed by some movement down near the water and spot an old woman apparently washing clothes in the stream. You may be tempted to wander down to the side of the stream and pass the time of day before making your way home, which would be a big mistake, for the old woman is the dreaded Ben Year, the washerwoman at the ford. The Ben Year is related to the Irish Banshee, Ben Shear. She is seen wandering near streams and pools where she washes the blood-stained clothes of those who are about to die. As such, she is seen as an omen of death, just like the Banshee. The legend has it that the Ben Year is the spirit of a woman who has died in childbirth and is cursed to carry out her role until the day her life would have normally ended. As you might expect, the Ben Year wouldn't win many prizes in a beauty competition. She is a small and very ugly woman with a crooked nose and one large nostril. She has a long protruding tooth and webbed feet. Safe to say that it takes more than a few drams before you consider chatting her up, which is a shame really, because with the right approach, it would have its rewards. And for this, you are supposed to get 3 wishes. I'm guessing this is wishful thinking. But one last note. Should you happen to be wandering near a stream on Isla, beware, as their version, Culchach, or Whaler of Isla, is much more dangerous. If she is interrupted from her grim task, she will strike the person's legs with her wet linen, whereby they will lose the use of them altogether. Try explaining that one to the wife. So there you have it, folks. There are some examples. We have mysterious women, washerwomen. We have the devil himself, werewolves, mermaids, mermen, merfolk, kelpies, selkies. There are many different creatures, and one I haven't looked at for this episode is fairies, and the reason for that is I think fairies deserve a whole episode for themselves because they have quite a complicated and in-depth lore to them, which is worth looking at, I think, because it does have strong connections to old-fashioned superstition, religion, mythology, and even connections to more modern, some of the more mainstream religions we have today. But there we have some examples of some of these creatures, just briefly. And there are so many more to be found, trust me. Now, the legends of the Hebrides usually revolve around places, and they can involve giants and the devil and all manner of mythology and mystery. And I have a number of stories for you here to do with places and people from these stories. And to start off with, I want to one that's quite well known for the area, and it's a place called Fingal's Cave. Now, there is a huge sea cave on the uninhabited island of Staffa in the Inner Hebrides. The cave is formed entirely from hexagonal jointed basalt columns, a similar structure to that found at the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. Known for its natural acoustics, the origins of its name are unknown. Some say it became known as Fingal's Cave after the eponymous hero of an epic poem by 18th century Scots poet historian James Macpherson, who claimed to have translated the poem from ancient Gaelic. Others claim around 250 AD, Finn MacCullain, or Fingal, was possibly an Irish general who had a band of faithful warriors. Finn is supposed to have been the father of Oisin, traditional bard of the Gaels. Gaels migrated into Scotland from Ireland until the Norsemen began their raids on the Scottish coast, and the stories of Fingal would doubtless have come across too. Soon he became revered in Scotland, and, boasted by the Oisinic heroic verse and songs, his name was a natural choice to assign to this dramatic and awe-inspiring cavern. Another legend has it that the Irish giant Finn MacCool built the Giant's Causeway between County Antrim and Scotland so that he could cross the ocean without getting his feet wet. Romantic composer Felix Mendelssohn visited in 1829 and wrote an overture. The Hebrides, also known as Fingal's Cave Overture, inspired by the weird echoes in the cave, and one of Pink Floyd's early songs is also called Fingal's Cave. Remaining in the area, there is a very old legend surrounding Dunscaigh Castle in the Isle of Skye, in which it is said Scaich, a female warrior, ran her school for heroes. Otis F. Swire has it that Cuchulainn, the hero of Ulster, unbeaten in battle, heard of Skye and her school. Most pertinently, he heard that Skye had yet to be bettered in a fight, so he arrived in Skye, wanting to see for himself. On arrival, he wasn't treated with the awe he expected. Much to his chagrin, Skye and her students were indifferent. Cuchulainn then fought and defeated all of the students, after which Skye took notice and came down from her lofty heights, ordering her daughter to face Cuchulainn. Upon the defeat of her daughter, however, the angry Skye took on Cuchulainn, but both found the other unbeatable. Skye's daughter prepared numerous meals to stop the pair battling, but to no avail, until she prepared a roast deer stuffed with hazelnuts. During the meal, Skye and Cuchulainn realized that they would never best each other, so made peace and agreed to come to the aid of the other should they call for help. Other versions have Cuchulainn becoming a student at the school and marrying either Skye or her daughters. Cuchulainn is also, as a side note, where we get the name for the two most famous mountain ranges on the Isle of Skye, the Black and Red Cuillins from. Sticking with the area once again, and an island just off the Isle of Skye, known as Pa Bay, and it was a scene of a rather ferocious battle with none other than Satan himself. The deserted chapel on Par Bay had become a hideout for a band of outlaws. One day, their leader thought it would be an idea to get rid of their enemies in one fell swoop with the help of Satan. The evil one was summoned by means of a large fire being set on the beach and 3 unfortunate cats being cruelly burned alive, with spells cast over them. This raised some minor demons, but the bandit chief wanted none other than Satan himself, who duly appeared and asked what was wanted of him. The bandit chief ordered him to kill the 2 men whom he feared the most. Satan said that the price for this was the forfeiture of 2 souls, much to the discomfort of the outlaws, leading to squabbling. The bandit chief had always boasted he could defeat Satan and take over hell if they could procure swords that didn't melt, which Satan just happened to mention. The offer on the table was that Satan and his minions would kill all the gang's enemy, then come back and fight for the outlaws' souls. This was duly accepted. After smiting their enemies, the battle took place, every outlaw falling easily, despite them having broadswords. Only their leader held out, who used a sword with a cross hilt. A black cat appeared from nowhere and knocked the sword from the bandit chief's grasp, who was promptly vanquished. The stones on the beach where this took place were said by Otter Swire to still be blackened by the fire. Now the Corryvreckan whirlpools are found at the Gulf of Corryvreckan, and Corryvreckan means cauldron of speckled seas, or cauldron of the Plaid. It's also called the Strait of Corryvreckan, and it is a narrow strait with the islands of Jura and Scraba off the west coast of mainland Scotland. The Corryvreckan is the 3rd largest whirlpool in the world. Flood tides and inflow from the Firth of Lorne to the west can drive the waters of Corryvreckan to waves of more than 30 feet, which is just over 9 meters, and the roar of the resulting maelstrom can be heard 10 miles away. Another legend surrounds Norse king Brachan. In various stories, Brachan moored his boat near the whirlpool to impress the father of a local princess, who wanted him to anchor by the whirlpool for 3 days and 3 nights. The prince had 3 ropes made, one from hemp, one from wool, and one from maiden's hair. It was said that the purity of the maiden's hair would make the rope unbreakable. However, on the first night, the hemp rope snapped. On the second night, it was the wool rope, and on the third night, the hair rope snapped also. The boat was subsequently dragged under. When the only surviving crew member dragged the body of the prince ashore, one maiden, racked with guilt, confessed that she was not as pure as she had made out, and that was why the rope broke. Traditionally in Hebridean, Scottish, probably pan-European culture, we often have individuals whose names are followed by a descriptive, whether it be wise, bold, stupid, fat, thin, all these kind of descriptions. However, one individual in particular here is worth mentioning, and his name is Ewan the Headless. Now, the story goes that during the 1300s, 2 dominant branches of Clan MacLean existed. MacLean of Lochbuie and MacLean of Jewett. They were headed by 2 brothers. Iachyn Raganach, Hector the Stern, controlled the MacLean of Lochbuie, and Lachin Lupanach, Lachlan the Wily, controlled the stronger MacLeans of Jewett. Hector had a son, who was called Ewan, with a small head. This name is perhaps evidence that Ewan was not the brightest clan member. Ewan married a rather dominant woman who picked on him from morning till night. She was known as the black-bottomed heron of the MacDougals. His father was now elderly, and his wife wanted to make sure that it was Ewan who would inherit the clan castle and its lands. Starting to sound a little bit like Macbeth. Hector eventually became annoyed at this constant badgering of him, and eventually an argument took place. During the argument, Ewan drew his sword and hit his father on the head with it and stormed off. Furious with his son's behaviour, Hector went to speak with his brother Lachlan. Unable to contain his anger, Lachlan challenged Ewan to a battle. On the eve of the battle, Ewan took a walk through a nearby wood. As he approached a stream that runs through the wood, to Ewan's astonishment, he spotted a washerwoman sitting at the ford of the river. The woman was hunched over with long hair. She washes clothes that are not dirty, and as she does, blood runs from them and into the stream. The washerwoman is not mortal, but is known as Ben Year, and a bad omen to those who see her. We know we've already met her. Ewan knew that he had to do, and sneaks up behind her as she is singing a lament to all those soldiers who have fallen in battle. Ewan gets hold of her, and she grants him a wish. Ewan not very brightly asks what an outcome of the battle will be, to which she replies, "If tomorrow morning you are given butter with your porridge without asking for it, you will be victorious." Ewan is angry at this answer and curses the washerwoman, and in a bad temper goes back to the castle. It is not a good idea, however, to curse a washerwoman. The next morning, Ewan and his clan members are at the banqueting hall, waiting for the breakfast to be served. The servants bring the porridge, but Ewan refuses to let anybody eat. Everyone sits in silence and waits. As time goes on and no butter has arrived, Ewan becomes angry and shouts at his wife. "The servants we have are terrible, and they don't even bring me butter with my porridge." He leaves for battle with his men, none of whom have had their porridge. A fierce battle commences. In the middle of the battle, Ewan aptly receives a sword blow to the top of his head, slicing the top of it off. Ewan manages to mount his horse, but as the horse gallops off, Ewan dies slumped in his saddle. The Macleans of Jewett leave the battlefield victorious. At this point on, it is said that whenever a member of the Lochbuie Macleans dies, that the presence of the Headless Horseman is felt, and the clamouring of hooves is heard. Some even say that Ewan, the Headless, rides out to harvest in the souls of the Lochbuie Macleans. Well, that'll teach you a story there. As we've already discovered, do not mess with washerwomen. Ewan here, Ewan the Brainless, very shortly became Ewan the Headless with the decisions he made. And remember, if you see any Macleans, be sure to ask whether they're from Lochbuie or Jewett. Now, the Brahon Seer is the next story I'll tell. And living around the same time as the legendary Nostradamus in France was a farm labourer called Cynnig Oer. His prophecies are maybe not as well known as his contemporary, but the alarming accuracy of his predictions has added to the sense of mystery that still exists around the Black Isle. Indeed, many of those local to this area of Scotland still hold his predictions in great reverence. The Brahon Seer was possibly born near Uig on the Isle of Lewis, towards the end of the 17th century. His gift of second sight was reputed to come from a small blue and black stone with a hole in the centre. Popular legend has it that his mother had witnessed spirits wandering near a graveyard and had prevented one spirit from returning after her wanderings. She finally allowed the spirit to go back to rest, and she had been given the stone as a gift in return. Cynnig's travels led him to the area near Strathpeffer. He lived by Loch Ushi and worked on the Brahon estate, home to the powerful Seaforth Mackenzies. It was from here that many of his prophecies were made. He predicted the Battle of Culloden and the demise of the Highland way of life. In one prediction, he was working on Drumossie Moor when he said, "Thy bleak wilderness will be stained by the best blood of the Highlands. Glad I am that I will not live to see that day where heads will be lopped off in the heather and no lives spared." Half a century later, the infamous battle was fought on this spot. Furthermore, in another prediction, he said that the clan will become so inefficient as to flee from their native country before an army of sheep. A very direct reference to the events of the Highland clearances. Some of his predictions saw a return of the fortunes of Scotland, and other advancements such as his statement, "Strange as it may seem to you this day, time will come, and it is not far off, where full-rigged ships will be seen sailing eastward and westward by the back of Taumnahurish near Inverness." 150 years later, the Caledonian Canal linked the lochs along the Great Glen. He was also reported to have said that Scotland's Parliament would return when a man would walk from England to France without getting their feet wet. With the building of the Channel Tunnel, this was indeed possible, and the Parliament soon followed. Other predictions sound downright bizarre, though. In nearby Strathpeffer, he predicted that when a fifth spire was built in the town, a ship would snag its anchor on the nearest one. The townsfolk were mindful of this years later, when indeed a fifth spire was erected in the town. Thinking that the prediction of a great flood, they were relieved in 1932, when an airship attending a nearby fair caught its moorings on a spire and fulfilled the predictions. Unfortunately for the seer, the accurate and precise nature of his predictions were to be his downfall. His powers had come to the attention of his employers, the Earl of Seaforth, and his wife. When the Earl was away in Paris, his wife Isabella called for Cunning and asked him to tell her how her husband was. The seer seemed reluctant to give any information and simply said that he was in good health. This enraged Isabella, who demanded more information. The seer then told her that her husband was on his knees in front of a French lady fairer than herself. This was too much for Lady Isabella, and she flew into a rage and had the poor seer thrown into a barrel of tar. As he was being dragged off to meet his fate, he made his last and most chilling prediction as a curse on the family of Mackenzie. The line of Seaforth will come to an end in sorrow. I see the last head of this house both deaf and dumb. He will be the father of 4 fair sons, all of whom he will follow to the tomb. He will live careworn and die mourning, knowing that the honours of his line are to be extinguished for ever, that no further chief of Mackenzies shall bear rule at Brehan or in Kintail. In 1783, Francis Humberston Mackenzie inherited the title. He was indeed deaf and mute due to a childhood attack of scarlet fever. He had 4 children, all of whom died prematurely, fulfilling this final prophecy. To this day, the Brahan seer's predictions are remembered in this part of the Highlands and Islands. The fireside tales have been passed down through generations, and some evidence exists on how serious the local people take his prophecies. In the small town of Strathpeffer stands the Eagle Stone, a small Celtic standing stone. He predicted that if the stone fell 3 times, the nearby loch would burst its banks and flood the village. It has fallen twice already, and has now been cemented in place. Now I wish to finish these tales with one which I think is appropriate to finish with, because anyone who knows the Highlands and Islands will know that the people who live there, many of them hold a great deal of importance in their religion and faith. And one of the 10 Commandments as found in Exodus is that you should keep the Sabbath. And there's a tale here of the importance of keeping that Sabbath, because among the tales collected by Father Alan MacDonald of Eriskay is one that echoes the strictness in part of the Highlands and Islands of not breaking the Sabbath. A workman, Dougal MacIntosh of Loch Aynot, was employed at the pier of Loch Skippet. Each weekend he returned home, crossing back to Loch Skippet before sunrise the following Monday. During one such journey he stopped to retie his shoelaces, and on standing beheld a strange man, who said in Gaelic, "Be not afraid of me, but take care that you do not break the Sunday again." The rule was, as Father Alan MacDonald notes, that the Sabbath ran from sunset on Saturday to sunrise on Monday. Now, we don't know who this person was who warned him. Could have just been a God-fearing member of the community. It could have been an angel. It could have been Satan himself reminding people that you must adhere by the rules as written down in Holy Scripture. And with that, it's time for us to jump back on the Calmac ferry, if it's running, as we have come to the end of an episode. I apologise there, there's a little bit of Hebridean humour for you, which probably won't necessarily go down well even in the Hebrides. We've explored some of the rich mythology and entertaining legends of the Hebridean people. Thank you all very much for listening. If you'd like to give me a rating and or a comment, please do. Each download and follow helps this podcast to grow and goes to show that there is a desire in people to expand their understanding of all things religion and philosophical, and mythological and legendary as well as we had here. So for now, thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you again next time.